The Secret Doctrine by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, a facsimile of the original edition of 1888, printed by the Cunningham Press, Alhambra, California. Book 2, Part 1, Anthropogenesis, stanzas translated with commentaries, from the Secret Book of John. Stanza 6, The Evolution of the Sweat-born. The evolution of the three races continued, and the second race create the third and perishes. Verse 22. Then the second evolved the sweat-born, the third race. The sweat grew, its drops grew, and the drops became hard and round. The sun warmed it, the moon cooled it and shaped it. The wind fed it until its ripeness. The white swan from the starry vault, the moon, overshadowed the big drop. The egg of the future race, the man-swan, Hamsa, of the later third. The text of the stanza clearly implies that the human embryo was nourished ab extra by cosmic forces, and that the father-mother furnished apparently the germ that ripened, in all probability a sweat-born egg, to be hatched out in some mysterious way, disconnected from the double parent. It is comparatively easy to conceive of an oviparous humanity, since even now man is, in one sense, egg-born. Margendi, moreover, in his Preces Elementare Physiologie, citing a case where the umbilical cord was ruptured and perfectly cicatrized, yet the infant was born alive, pertinently asks, how was the circulation carried on in this organ? On the next page he says, nothing is at present known respecting the use of digestion in the fetus, and respecting its nutrition propounds this query. What then can we say of the nutrition of the fetus? Physiological works contain only vague conjectures on this point. But, the skeptic may urge, Margendi's book belongs to the last generation, and science has since made such strides that his stigma of ignorance can no longer be fixed upon the profession. Indeed, then let us turn to a very great authority upon physiology, meaning Sir M. Foster, Textbook of Physiology, 3rd edition, 1879, page 623. And to the disadvantage of modern science, we shall find him saying, concerning the rise and development of the functional activities of the embryo, our knowledge is almost a blank. We know scarcely nothing about the various steps by which the primary fundamental qualities of the protoplasm in the ovum are differentiated into the complex phenomena which we have attempted in this book to explain. The students will now kindly draw a veil before the statue of Hygeia and bandage the eyes of the bust of Galen and Hippocrates, lest they look reproachfully at their degenerate descendants. One further fact we must note. Sir M. Foster is discreetly silent about the case of the ruptured umbilical cord cited by his great French confrère. This is a very curious statement, as explained in the commentaries. To make it clear, the first race having created the second by budding, as just explained, the second race gives birth to the third, which itself is separated into three distinct divisions, consisting of men differently procreated. The first two of these are produced by an oviparous method, presumably unknown to modern natural history, while the early sub-races of the third humanity procreated their species by a kind of exudation of moisture or vital fluid, the drops of which coalescing formed an oviform ball, or shall we say egg, which served as an extraneous vehicle for the generation therein of a fetus and child. The mode of procreation by later races changed, in its results at all events. The little ones of the earlier races were entirely sexless, shapeless even, for all one knows. See the Timaeus. But those of the later races were born androgynous. It is in the third race that the separation of sexes occurred. From being previously asexual, humanity became distinctly hermaphrodite or bisexual, and finally the man-bearing eggs began to give birth, gradually and almost imperceptibly in their evolutionary development, first to beings in which one sex predominated over the other, and finally to distinct men and women. And now let us search for corroboration of these statements in the religious legends of East and West. Let us take the egg-born race first. Think of Kashyapa, the Vedic sage and the most prolific of creators. He was the son of Mariki, Brahma's mind-born son, and he is made to become the father of the Nagas or serpents, among other beings. Exoterically, the Nagas are semi-divine beings which have a human face and the tail of a serpent. Yet there was a race of Nagas, said to be 1,000 in number only, born or rather sprung from Kadra, Kasyap's wife, for the purpose of peopling Patala, which is undeniably America, as will be shown. And there was a Nagadvipa, one of the 7 divisions of Bharatavarsha, India, inhabited by people bearing the same name, who are allowed even by some Orientalists to be historical and to have left many a trace behind them to this day. Now the point most insisted upon at present is that, whatever origin be claimed for man, his evolution took place in this order. 1. Sexless, as all the earlier forms are. 2. Then by a natural transition he became a solitary hermaphrodite, a bisexual being, and 3. Finally separated and became what he is now. Science teaches us that all the primitive forms, though sexless, still retained the power of undergoing the process of asexual multiplication. Why then should man be excluded from that law of nature? Bisexual reproduction is an evolution, a specialized and perfected form on the scale of matter of the fissiparous act of reproduction. Occult teachings are preeminently panspermic, and the early history of humanity is hidden only from ordinary mortals. Nor is the history of the primitive races buried from the initiates in the tomb of time, as it is for profane science. Therefore, supported on the one hand by that science which shows to us progressive development and an internal cause for every external modification as a law in nature, and on the other hand by an implicit faith in the wisdom, we may say pansophia even, of the universal traditions gathered and preserved by the initiates, who have perfected them into an almost faultless system. Thus supported, we venture to state the doctrine clearly. In an able article written some 15 years ago, our learned and respected friend Professor Alex Wilder of New York shows the absolute logic and necessity for believing the primeval race double-sexed, and gives a number of scientific reasons for it. Note, see extract from that essay in the Theosophist of February 1883, end of note. He argues firstly that a large part of the vegetable creation exhibits the phenomenon of bisexuality, a Linnaean classification enumerating thus almost all plants. This is the case in the superior families of the vegetable kingdoms as much as in the lower forms, from the hemp to the Lombardy poplar and ailanthus. In the animal kingdom, in insect life, the moth generates a worm, as in the Mysteries the great secret was expressed. Taurus draconem genuit et taurum draco. The coral-producing family, which, according to Agassiz, has spent many hundreds of thousands of years during the present geological period in building out the peninsula of Florida, produce their offspring from themselves like the buds and ramifications in a tree. Bees are somewhat in the same line. The aphids, or plant lice, keep house like Amazons, and virgin parents perpetuate the race for 10 successive generations. What say the old sages, the philosopher teachers of antiquity? Aristophanes speaks thus on the subject in Plato's Banquet. Our nature of old was not the same as it is now. It was androgynous, the form and name partaking of and being common to both the male and female. Their bodies were round, and the manner of their running circular. Note, compare Ezekiel's vision, chapter 1, of the 4 divine beings who had the likeness of a man and yet had the appearance of a wheel. When they went upon their 4 sides, for the spirit of the living creature was in the wheel. End of note. They were terrible in force and strength, and had prodigious ambition. Hence Zeus divided each of them into 2, making them weaker. Apollo, under his direction, closed up the skin. Meschia and Meschiani were but a single individual with the old Persians. They also taught that man was the product of the tree of life, grown in androgynous pairs, till they were separated at the subsequent modification of the human form. Note, see Professor Wilder's essay, The Primeval Race, Double-Sexed, end of note. In the Toledut, generation of Adam, the verse, God created, bara, brought forth, man in his image, In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. If read esoterically, we yield the true sense, meaning the Elohim, the gods, brought forth from themselves by modification man in their image, created they him, collective humanity, or Adam. Male and female created he, collective deity, them. This will show the esoteric point. Note, Eusebius, a Christian, and the rabbis Samuel, Manasseh ben Israel, and Maimonides taught that Adam had two faces and one person, and from the beginning he was both male and female, male on one side and female on the other, like Manush Brahma, but afterwards the parts were separated. The 139th Psalm of David, recited by Rabbi Jeremiah ben Eleazar, is evidence of this. Thou hast fashioned me behind and before, not beset, as in the Bible, which is absurd and meaningless, and this shows, as Professor Wilder thinks, that the primeval form of mankind was androgynous. End of note. The sexless race was their first production, a modification of and from themselves, the pure spiritual existences, and this was Adam Solus. Thence came the second race, Adam-Eve, or Jod-Heva, inactive androgynes, and finally the third, or the separating hermaphrodite, Cain and Abel, who produced the fourth, Set, Enos, etc. It is that third, the last semi-spiritual race, which was also the last vehicle of the divine and innate wisdom, ingenerate in the Enochs, the seers of that mankind. The fourth, which had tasted from the fruit of the tree of good and evil, wisdom united already to earthy and therefore impure intelligence, had consequently to acquire that wisdom by initiation and great struggle. See the union of Kokmah, wisdom, with Bina, intelligence, or Jehovah, the demarriage, called understanding in the Proverbs of Solomon chapter 7. Unto men of wisdom, divine occult wisdom, crieth, O ye simple, understand wisdom, and ye fools, be of an understanding heart. It is spirit and matter, the nous and the psyche of the latter, which St. James says that it is earthly, sensual, and devilish. End of note. And the union of wisdom and intelligence, the former ruling the latter, is called in the Hermetic books the God possessing the double fecundity of the two sexes. Mystically, Jesus was held to be man-woman. See also in the Orphic hymns sung during the mysteries we find Zeus is a male, Zeus is an immortal maid. The Egyptian Ammon was the goddess Neith in his other half. Jupiter has female breasts. Venus is bearded in some of her statues, and Ila, the goddess, is also Sudyumna, the god, as Vaivasvata's progeny. The name Adam, says Professor A. Wilder, or man itself, implies this double form of existence. It is identical with Atamas, or Thomas, Tamil, Tam, which is rendered by the Greek Didymos, a twin. If therefore the first woman was formed subsequently to the first man, she must, as a logical necessity, be taken out of man, and the side which the Elohim had taken from man made he a woman. Genesis chapter 2. The Hebrew word here used is tzala, which bears the translation we have given. It is easy to trace the legend in Berosus, who says that Talat, the Omoroka, or Lady of Urka, was the beginning of creation. She was also Melita, the queen of the moon, the two twin births of Genesis, that of Cain and Abel, and of Esau and Jacob, shadowed the same idea. The name Hebel is the same as Eve, and its characteristic seems to be feminine, continues the author. Unto thee shall be his desire, said the Lord God to Cain, and thou shalt rule over him. The same language had been uttered to Eve. Thy desire shall be thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Thus the pristine bisexual unity of the human third root race is an axiom in the secret doctrine. Its virgin individuals were raised to gods because that race represented their divine dynasty. The moderns are satisfied with worshipping the male heroes of the fourth race who created gods after their own sexual image, whereas the gods of primeval mankind were male and female. As stated in Book 1, the humanities developed coordinately and on parallel lines with the four elements, every new race being physiologically adapted to meet the additional element. Our fifth race is rapidly approaching the fifth element, call it interstellar ether if you will, which has more to do, however, with psychology than with physics. We men have learned to live in every climate, whether frigid or tropical, but the first two races had naught to do with climate, nor were they subservient to any temperature or change therein. And thus, we are taught, men lived down to the close of the third root race, when eternal spring reigned over the whole globe, such as is now enjoyed by the inhabitants of Jupiter, a world, says M. Flammarion, which is not subject, like our own, to the vicissitudes of seasons, nor to abrupt alternations of temperature, but which is enriched with all the treasures of eternal spring. Pluralité des Mondes, page 69. Those astronomers who maintain that Jupiter is in a molten condition, in our sense of the term, are invited to settle their dispute with this learned French astronomer. Note: an hypothesis evolved in 1881 by Mr. Matthew Williams seems to have impressed astronomers but little. Says the author of The Fuel of the Sun in Knowledge, December 23, 1881. Applying now the researches of Dr. Andrews to the conditions of solar existence, I conclude that the Sun has no nucleus, either solid, liquid, or gaseous, but is composed of dissociated matter in the critical state, surrounded first by a flaming envelope due to the recombination of the dissociated matter, and outside of this by another envelope of vapors due to this combination." Unquote. This is a novel theory to be added to other hypotheses, all scientific and orthodox. The meaning of the critical state is explained by Mr. M. Williams in the same journal, December 9, 1881, in an article on solids, liquids, and gases. Speaking of an experiment by Dr. Andrews on carbonic acid, the scientist says that when 88 degrees is reached, the boundary between liquid and gas vanishes. Liquid and gas have blended into one mysterious intermediate fluid. An indefinite fluctuating something is there filling the whole of the tube, an etherealized liquid or a visible gas. Hold a red-hot poker between your eye and the light. You will see an upflowing wave of movement, or what appears like liquid air. The appearance of the hybrid fluid in the tube resembles this, but is sensibly denser, and evidently stands between the liquid and gaseous states of matter, as pitch or treacle stands between solid and liquid. The temperature at which this occurs has been named by Dr. Andrews the critical temperature. Here the gases and the liquid states are continuous, and it is probable that all other substances capable of existing in both states have their own particular critical temperatures. Speculating further upon this critical state, Mr. Matthew Williams emits some quite occult theories about Jupiter and other planets. He says, "Our notions of solids, liquids, and gases are derived from our experiences of the state of matter here upon this earth. Could we be removed to another planet, they would be curiously changed. On Mercury, water would rank as one of the condensable gases, on Mars as a fusible solid. But what on Jupiter? Recent observations justify us in regarding this as a miniature sun with an external envelope of cloudy matter, apparently of partially condensed water, but red-hot, or probably still hotter within. His vaporous atmosphere is evidently of enormous depth, and the force of gravitation, being on his visible outer surface 2.5 times greater than that on our Earth's surface, the atmospheric pressure in descending below this visible surface must soon reach that at which the vapor water would be brought to its critical condition. Therefore we may infer that the oceans of Jupiter are neither of frozen liquid nor gaseous water, but are oceans or atmospheres of critical water. If any fish or birds swim or fly therein, they must be very critically organized." Unquote. As the whole mass of Jupiter is 300 times greater than that of the Earth, and its compressing energy towards the center proportional to this its materials, if similar to those of the Earth and no hotter, would be considerably more dense, and the whole planet would have a high specific gravity. But we know by the movement of its satellites that instead of this, its specific gravity is less than a fourth of that of the Earth. This justifies the conclusion that it is intensely hot, for even hydrogen, if cold, would become denser than Jupiter under such pressure. Quote, as all elementary substances may exist as solids, liquids, or gases, or critically according to the conditions of temperature and pressure, I am justified in hypothetically concluding that Jupiter is neither a solid or liquid nor a gaseous planet, but a critical planet, or an orb composed internally of associated elements in the critical state, and surrounded by a dense atmosphere of their vapors and those of some of their compounds, such as water. The same reasoning applies to Saturn and other large and rarefied planets." Unquote. It's gratifying to see how scientific imagination approaches every year more closely to the borderland of our occult teachings. End of note. It must, however, be always borne in mind that the eternal spring referred to is only a condition cognized as such by the Jovians. It is not spring, so-called. It is not the spring as we know it. In the reservation it is to be found that reconciliation between the two theories here cited. Both embrace partial truths. It is thus a universal tradition that mankind has evolved gradually into its present shape from an almost transparent condition of texture, and neither by miracle nor by sexual intercourse. Moreover, this is in full accord with the ancient philosophies, from those of Egypt and India with their divine dynasties down to that of Plato. And all these universal beliefs must be classed with the presentiments and obstinate conceptions, some of them ineradicable in popular faiths. Such beliefs, as remarked by Louis Figuier, are frequently the outcome of the wisdom and observation of an infinite number of generations of men. For a tradition which has an uniform and universal existence has all the weight of scientific testimony. Note, see The Day After Death, page 23, end of note. And there is more than one such tradition in the Puranic allegories, as has been shown. Moreover, the doctrine that the first race of mankind was formed out of the Kayas, astral images of the Pitris, is fully corroborated in the Zohar. In the Tzalam, shadow image of Elohim, the Pitris, was made Adam, man. Chromonid 376a, Brody, edition 3, 159a, and Kabbalah Isaac Meyer, page 420. It has been repeatedly urged as an objection that, however high the degree of metaphysical thought in ancient India, yet the old Egyptians had nothing but crass idolatry and zolatry to boast of. Hermes, as alleged, being the work of mystic Greeks who lived in Egypt. To this one answer can be given. A direct proof that the Egyptians believed in the secret doctrine is that it was taught to them at initiation. Let the objectors open the Elogae Physicae et Ethicae of Stobaeus, the Greek compiler of ancient fragments who lived in the 5th century Anno Domini. The following is a transcription by him of an old Hermetic fragment showing the Egyptian theory of the soul. Translated word for word, it says, quote, "From one soul, that of all, spring all the souls, which spread themselves as if purposely distributed through the world. These souls undergo many transformations. Those which are already creeping creatures turn into aquatic animals. From these aquatic animals are derived land animals, and from the latter the birds. From the beings who live aloft in the air, heaven, men are born. On reaching that status of men, the souls receive the principle of conscious immortality, become spirits, then pass into the choir of gods." Unquote. Verse 23. The self-born were the Chayas, the shadows from the bodies of the sons of twilight. Neither water nor fire could destroy them. Their sons were so destroyed. This verse cannot be understood without the help of the commentaries. It means that the first root race, the shadows of the progenitors, could not be injured or destroyed by death. Being so ethereal and so little human in constitution, they could not be affected by any element, flood or fire. But their sons, the second root race, could be and were so destroyed. As the progenitors merged wholly in their own astral bodies, which were their progeny, so that progeny was absorbed in its descendants, the sweatborn. These were the second humanity, composed of the most heterogeneous, gigantic, semi-human monsters, the first attempts of material nature at building human bodies. The ever-blooming lands of the second continent, Greenland among others, were transformed in order from Edens with an eternal spring into Hyperborean Hades. This transformation was due to the displacement of the great waters of the globe, to oceans changing their beds, and the bulk of the second race perished in this first great throe of the evolution and consolidation of the globe during the human period. Of such great cataclysms there have already been 4, and we may expect a 5th for ourselves in due course of time. Note: the first occurred when what is now the North Pole was separated from the later continents. End of note. A few words about deluges and Noahs. The accounts in the various Puranas about our progenitors are as contradictory in their details as everything else. Thus, while in the Rig Veda, Ida, or Ila, is called the instructress of Vaivasvata Manu, Sayana makes of her a goddess presiding over the earth, and the Satapata Brahmana shows her to be the Manu's daughter, an offering of his sacrifice, and later on, his, Vaivasvata's, wife, by whom he begat the race of Manus. In the Puranas again she is Vaivasvata's daughter, yet the wife of Buddha, wisdom, the illegitimate son of the moon, Soma, and the planet Jupiter's, Brihaspati's wife, Tara. All this, which seems a jumble to the profane, is full of philosophical meaning to the occultist. On the very face of the narrative a secret and sacred meaning is perceivable, all the details, however, being so purposely mixed up that the experienced eye of an initiate alone can follow them and place the events in their proper order. The story as told in the Mahabharata strikes the keynote, and yet it needs to be explained by the secret sense contained in the Bhagavad Gita. It is the prologue to the drama of our 5th humanity. While Vaivasvata was engaged in devotion on the river bank, a fish craves his protection from a bigger fish. He saves and places it in a jar, where, growing larger and larger, it communicates to him the news of the forthcoming deluge. It is the well-known Matsya avatar, the first avatar of Vishnu, the Dagon of the Chaldean Xisutrus, and many other things besides. Note on Dagon. We must remember that at the head of all the Babylonian gods were Ea, Anu, and the primeval Bel, and that Ea, the first, was the god of wisdom, the great god of light and of the deep, and that he was identified with Ioannes, or the biblical Dagon, the manfish who rose out of the Persian Gulf. End of note. The story is too well known to need repetition. Vishnu orders a ship to be built, in which Manu is said to be saved along with the 7 rishis, the latter, however, being absent from other texts. Here the 7 rishis stand for the 7 races, the 7 principles, and various other things, for there is again a double mystery involved in this manifold allegory. We have said elsewhere that the great flood had several meanings, and that it referred, as also does the fall, to both spiritual and physical, cosmic and terrestrial events. As above, so it is below. The ship or ark, navis in short, being the symbol of the male generative principle, is typified in the heavens by the moon, and on the earth by the womb, both being the vessels and bearers of the seeds of life and being which the sun, or Vishnu, the male principle, vivifies and fructifies. Note, see Part 2, section The Holy of Holies. End of note. The first cosmic flood refers to the primordial creation or the formation of heaven and the earths, in which case chaos and the great deep stand for the flood, and the moon for the mother, from whom proceed all the life germs. Note, it is far later on that the moon became a male god. With the Hindus it was Soma, with the Chaldeans Nanak, or Nannar, and Sin, the son of Mulil, the older Bel. The, quote, Akkadians, unquote, called him the Lord of Ghosts, and he was the god of Nippur, Nifer, in northern Babylonia. It is Mulil who caused the waters of the flood to fall from heaven on earth, for which Khisuturus would not allow him to approach his altar. As the modern Assyriologists have now ascertained, it is the northern Nippur which is the center whence Chaldean black magic spread, and Eridu the southern, which was the primitive seat of the worship of the culture god, the god of divine wisdom, the sun god being the supreme deity everywhere. With the Jews, the moon is connected with Israel's Jehovah and his seed because Ur was the chief seat of the worship of the moon god, and because Abraham is said to have come from Ur, when from Abraham he becomes Abraham. End of note. But the terrestrial deluge and its story has also its dual application. In one case, it has reference to that mystery when mankind was saved from utter destruction by the mortal woman being made the receptacle of the human seed at the end of the third race, and in the other to the real and historical Atlantean submersion. Note in the third race, when Narada, the virgin ascetic, threatened to put an end to the human race by preventing Daksha's sons from procreating it. End of note. In both cases, the host, or the Manu, which saved the seed, is called Vaivasvata Manu, hence the diversity between the Puranic and other versions, while in the Satapatha Brahmana, Vaivasvata produces a daughter and begets from her the race of Manu, which is a reference to the first human Manushyas, who had to create women by will, Kriya Shakti, before they were naturally born from the hermaphrodites as an independent sex, and who were therefore regarded as their creator's daughters. The Puranic accounts make of her, Ida or Ila, the wife of Buddha, wisdom, the latter version referring to the event of the Atlantean flood, when Vaivasvata, the great sage on earth, saved the fifth root race from being destroyed along with the remnants of the fourth. This is shown very clearly in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is made to say, "The 7 great rishis, the 4 preceding Manus, partaking of my essence, were born from my mind. From them sprung, were born, the human races and the world." Chapter 10, verse 6. Here the 4 preceding Manus, out of the 7, are the 4 races which have already lived, since Krishna belongs to the 5th race, his death having inaugurated the Kali Yuga. Note on the 4 races. This is corroborated by learned Brahmin. In his most excellent lectures on the Bhagavad Gita, see Theosophist, April 1887, page 444, the lecturer says, "There is a peculiarity to which I must call your attention. He, Krishna, speaks here of 4 manas. Why does he speak of 4? We are now in the 7th Manvantara, that of Vaivasvata. If he is speaking of the past manas, he ought to speak of 6, but he only mentions 4. In some commentaries, an attempt has been made to interpret this in a peculiar manner. The word Chatvaraha is separated from the word Manavaha, and is made to refer to Sanaka, Sanandana, Sanatkumara, and Sanatsuyata, who are also included among the mind-born sons of Prajapati. But this interpretation will lead to a most absurd conclusion and make the sentence contradict itself. The persons alluded to in the text have a qualifying clause in the sentence. It is well known that Sanaka and the other 3 refused to create, though the other sons had consented to do so. Therefore, in speaking of those persons from whom humanity has sprung into existence, it would be absurd to include those 4 also in the list. The passage must be interpreted without splitting the compound into 2 nouns. The number of manas will then be 4, and the statement would then contradict the Puranic account, though it would be in harmony with the occult theory. You will recollect that it is stated in occultism that we are now in the 5th root race. Each root race is considered as the santati of a peculiar manu. Now the 4th race has passed, or, in other words, there have been 4 past manus. End of note. Thus Vaivasvata Manu, the son of Surya, the sun, and the savior of our race, is connected with the seed of life, both physically and spiritually. But at present, while speaking of all, we have to concern ourselves only with the first two. The quote deluge unquote is undeniably a universal tradition. Glacial periods were numerous, and so were the deluges, for various reasons. Stockwell and Crowell enumerate some half-a-dozen glacial periods and subsequent deluges, the earliest of all being dated by them 850,000 and the last about 100,000 years ago. Note: Smithsonian Contributions to Knowledge, 18, American Journal of Science, 3/11/456, and Crowell's Climate and Time. Lemuria was not submerged by a flood, but was destroyed by volcanic action, and afterwards sank. End of note. But which was our deluge? Assuredly the former, the one which to this date remains recorded in the traditions of all the peoples, from the remotest antiquity, the one that finally swept away the last peninsulas of Atlantis, beginning with Ruta and Daitya, and ending with the comparatively small island mentioned by Plato. This is shown by the agreement of certain details in all the legends. It was the last of its gigantic character. The Little Deluge, the traces of which Baron Bunsen found in Central Asia, and which he places at about 10,000 years before Christ, had nothing to do with either the semi-universal deluge or Noah's flood, the latter being a purely mythical rendering of old traditions, nor even with the submersion of the last Atlantean island, at least only a moral connection. Our fifth race, the non-initiated portions, hearing of many deluges, confused them, and now know of but one. This one altered the whole aspect of the globe in its interchange and shifting of land and sea. We may compare the traditions of the Peruvians. Quote, the Incas, 7 in number, have repeopled the earth after the deluge, they say. Coste, Volume 1, Chapter 4, page 19. Humboldt mentions the Mexican version of the same legend, but confuses somewhat the details of the still preserved legend concerning the American Noah. Nevertheless, the eminent naturalist mentions twice 7 companions and the divine bird, which preceded the both of the Aztecs, and thus makes 15 elect instead of the 7 and the 14. This was written probably under some involuntary reminiscence of Moses, who is said to have mentioned 15 grandsons of Noah, who escaped with their grandsire. Then again Xisuthurus, the Chaldean Noah, is saved and translated alive to heaven, like Enoch, with the 7 gods, the Kabirim, or the 7 divine titans. Again, the Chinese Yao has 7 figures which sail with him and which he will animate when he lands, and use for human seed. Osiris, when he enters the ark or solar boat, takes 7 rays with him, etc., etc. Sankoniaton makes the Alete, or Titans, the Kabirim, contemporary with Agrurius, the great Phoenician god, whom Faber sought to identify with Noah. Further, it is suspected that the name of Titan is derived from Titten, the fountains of the chaotic abyss. Titeus, or Titius, is the divine deluge. And thus the Titans, who are 7, are shown to be connected with the flood and the 7 rishis, saved by Vaivashvata Manu. Notes. Note on Agrurius. Agrurius is Kronos, or Saturn, and the prototype of the Israelitish Jehovah. As connected with Arga, the moon or ark of salvation, Noah is mythologically one with Saturn, but then this cannot relate to the terrestrial flood. But see Faber's Kabiri, Volume 1, pages 35, 43, and 45. Note on Titten and the chaotic abyss. See Volume 2 of the same book, page 240. A note on Titans. Sankoniaton says that the Titans were the sons of Kronos, and 7 in number, and he calls them fire worshippers, Alete, sons of Agni, and Diluvians. Aleit is the god of fire, end of note. They are the sons of Kronos, time, and Area, the earth, and as Agruerus, Saturn, and Siddiq are one and the same personage, and as the 7 Kabiri are said to be the sons of Siddiq or Kronos Saturn, the Kabiri and Titans are identical. For once the pious Faber was right in his conclusions when he wrote, "I have no doubt of the 7 Titans and Kabiri being the same as the 7 rishis of the Hindu mythology, within brackets question mark, who are said to have escaped in a boat along with Manu, the head, within brackets question mark, of the family." Unquote. But he is less fortunate in his speculations when he adds, "The Hindus in their wild legends have variously perverted the history of the Noachidae, within brackets question mark exclamation mark. Yet it is remarkable that they seem to have religiously adhered to the number 7. Note, of which 7, let us remark, the Aryans and not the Semites were the originators, while the Jews got that number from the Chaldeans." End of note. Hence Captain Wilford very judiciously observes that perhaps the 7 Manus, the 7 Brahmadiacs, and the 7 Rishis are the same, and make only 7 individual persons. Note, 7 individual sons of God, or Pitas and Pitris, also in this case the sons of Kronos or Saturn, Kala, time, and Archites, like the Kabirian Titans, as their name, lunar ancestors, shows, the moon being the ark or arga on the watery abyss of space. End of note. The 7 Brahmadiacs were Prajapatis, or lords of the Prajas, or creatures. From them mankind was born, and they are probably the same with the 7 Manus. These 7 grand ancestors of the human race were created for the purpose of replenishing the earth with inhabitants. See Asiatic Researches, Volume 5, page 246. And Faber adds that the mutual resemblance of the Kabiris, the Titans, the Rishis, and the Noetic family is too striking to be the effect of mere accident. Note, see Kabiri, Volume 1, page 131. End of note. Faber was led into this mistake and subsequently built his entire theory concerning the Kabiri on the fact that the name of the scriptural Japhet is on the list of the Titans contained in a verse of the Orphic hymns. According to Orpheus, the names of the 7 Archite Titans, whom Faber refuses to identify with the impious Titans, their descendants, were Keus, Creus, Phorcys, Kronos, Oceanus, Hyperion, and Iapetus. But why could not the Babylonian Ezra have adopted the name of Iapetos for one of Noah's sons? The Kabiri, who are the Titans, are also called Manes, and their mother Mania, according to Arnobius, Adversum Gentis, Book 3, page 124. The Hindus can therefore claim with far more reason that the Manes mean their Manus, and that Mania is the female Manu. See Ramayana. Mania is Ila or Ida, the wife and daughter of Vaivashvata Manu, from whom he begat the race of Manus. Like Rhea, the mother of the Titans, she is the earth, Sayana making her the goddess of the earth, and she is but the second edition and repetition of Vak. Both Ida and Vak are turned into males and females, Ida becoming a Sudyumna, and Vak, the female Virai, turning into a woman in order to punish the Gandharvas, one version referring to cosmic and divine theogony, the other to the later period. The Manes and Mania of Arnobius are names of Indian origin, appropriated by the Greeks and Latins and disfigured by them. Thus it is no accident, but the result of one archaic doctrine common to all, of which the Israelites, through Ezra, the author of the modernized Mosaic books, were the latest adapters. So unceremonious were they with other people's property that Berosus, in Antiquités Libia 1, page 8, shows that Tityr, of whom Diodorus makes the mother of the Titans or Diluvians, was the wife of Noah. For this Faber calls him the pseudo-Berosus, yet accepts the information in order to register one proof more that the pagans have borrowed all their gods from the Jews, by transforming patriarchal material. According to our humble opinion, this is one of the best proofs possible of exactly the reverse. It shows as clear as facts can show that it is the biblical pseudo-personages which are all borrowed from pagan myths, if myths they must be. It shows at any rate that Berosus was well aware of the source of Genesis, and that it bore the same cosmic astronomical character as the allegories of Isis Orisis and the Ark and other older archite symbols. For Berossus says that Titea Magna was afterwards called Aretia and worshipped with the earth, and this identifies Titea, Noah's consort, with Rhea, the mother of the Titans, and with Ida, both being goddesses who preside over the earth and the mothers of the Manush and Manish, or Titan Kabiri, Titan Kabiri. Note on Aritia. Aritia is the female form of Artes, Egyptian Mars. Thence the Chaldean and now Hebrew word Arets, earth, the author of Beitrages ur Kenntnis, article under Artes, Mars, quotes, Adit Kedrenus, Psalm 1:3, Stella Martis ab Egyptis vocatur ertosi, plantare, generare, significat autem hoc omnis generis procreationem et vivificationem, omnisce substantiae et materia naturam, et vim ordinantem acne procreantem. It is earth as a source of being, or, explained by the author of the Source of Measures, arts, is the same in Hebrew and Egyptian, and both combine the primeval idea of earth as a source, precisely as in the Hebrew itself under another form, Adam and Madim, Mars, are the same, and combine the idea of earth with Adam under the form of Adam. End of note. And Titea Retia was worshipped as Horkia, says the same Berossus, and this is a title of Vesta, goddess of the earth. Sicanus deficavit aretiam, et nominavit eam lingua janigena horaciam. From the same source, Book 5, page 64. Scarce an ancient poet of historic or prehistoric days who failed to mention the sinking of the two continents, often called isles, in one form or another. Hence the destruction, besides Atlantis, of the Phlegiae. See Pausanias and Ornus, who both tell how, quote, from its deep root base the Phlegian isle stern Neptune shook, and plunged beneath the waves its impious inhabitants, unquote. From Dionysius, Book 18, page 319. Faber felt convinced that the insulae Phlegiae were Atlantis, but all such allegories are more or less distorted echoes of the Hindu tradition about that great cataclysm which befell the fourth, really human, though gigantic race, the one which preceded the Aryan. Yet, as just said, like all other legends, that of the deluge has more than one meaning. It refers in theogony to pre-cosmic transformations, to spiritual correlations, however absurd the term may sound to a scientific ear, and also to the subsequent cosmogony, to the great flood of waters, matter, in chaos, awakened and fructified by those spirit rays which were swamped by and perished in the mysterious differentiation, a pre-cosmic mystery, the prologue to the drama of being. Anu, Bel, and Noah preceded Adam Kadmon, Adam the Red, and Noah, just as Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva preceded Vaivashvata and the rest. See Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, pages 420 et sequens, where one or two of the seven meanings are hinted at. All this goes to show that the semi-universal deluge, known to geology first glacial period, must have occurred just at the time allotted to it by the secret doctrine, namely 200,000 years in round numbers, after the commencement of our fifth race, or about the time assigned by Monsieur Croll and Stockwell for the first glacial period, that is, about 850,000 years ago. Thus, as the latter disturbance is attributed by geologists and astronomers to an extreme eccentricity of the Earth's orbit, and as the secret doctrine attributes it to the same source, but with the addition of another factor, the shifting of the Earth's axis, a proof of which may be found in the Book of Enoch, if the veiled language of the Puranas is not understood. All this should tend to show that the ancients knew something of the modern discoveries of science. Enoch, when speaking of the great inclination of the earth, which is in travail, is quite significant and clear. Is not this evident? Noah is Noah, floating on the waters in his ark, the latter being the emblem of the Arga, or moon, the feminine principle. Noah is the spirit falling into matter. We find him, as soon as he descends upon the earth, planting a vineyard, drinking of the wine, and getting drunk on it. That is, the pure spirit becomes intoxicated as soon as it is finally imprisoned in matter. The 7th chapter of Genesis is only another version of the first. Thus, where the latter reads, "And darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters," in chapter 7 it is said, "And the waters prevailed, and the ark went, with Noah the Spirit, upon the face of the waters." Thus Noah, if identical with the Chaldean Nuah, is the spirit vivifying matter, which latter is chaos represented by the deep, or the waters of the flood. In the Babylonian legend, the pre-cosmical blended with the terrestrial event, it is Ishtar, Ashtaroth, or Venus, the lunar goddess, who is shut up in the ark and sends out a dove in search of dry land. See Isis Unveiled, Volume 2, pages 423 and 424. George Smith notes in the tablets, first the creation of the moon and then that of the sun. Its beauty and perfection are extolled, and the regularity of its orbit, which led to its being considered the type of a judge and the regulator of the world. If this story related simply to a cosmogonical cataclysm, even were the latter universal, why should the goddess Ishtar or Astoreth, the moon, speak of the creation of the sun after the deluge? The waters might have reached as high as the mountain of Nizir, Chaldean version, or Jebel Judi, the deluge mountains of the Arabian legend, or yet Ararat of the biblical narrative, and even the Himalaya of the Hindu tradition, and yet not reach the sun. The Bible itself stopped short of such a miracle. It is evident that the deluge of the people who first recorded it had another meaning, less problematical and far more philosophical than that of an universal deluge, of which there are no geological traces whatever. As all such cataclysms are periodical and cyclical, and as Manu Vaivashvata figures as a generic character under various circumstances and events, vide Infer, the 7 manas of humanity, there seems to be no serious objection to the supposition that the first great flood had an allegorical as well as a cosmic meaning, and that it happened at the end of the Satya Yuga, the age of truth, when the second root race, the Manu with bones, made its primeval appearance as the sweat-born. Note, all such expressions are explained in the Anthropogenesis of this book and elsewhere. End of note. The second flood, the so-called universal, which affected the fourth root race, now conveniently regarded by theology as the accursed race of giants, the Cainites and the sons of Ham, is that flood which was first perceived by geology. If one carefully compares the accounts in the various legends of the Chaldees and other exoteric works of the nations, it will be found that all of them agree with the orthodox narratives given in the Brahmanical books. And it may be perceived that while in the first account there is no god or mortal yet on earth when Manu Vaivashvata lands on the Himavan, in the second the 7 rishis are allowed to keep him company, thus showing that whereas some accounts refer to the sidereal and cosmic flood before the so-called creation, the others treat one of the great flood of matter on earth and the other of a real watery deluge. In the Satapatha Brahmana, Manu finds that the flood had swept away all living creatures, and he alone was left, that is, the seed of life alone remained from the previous dissolution of the universe, or Mahapralaya, after a day of Brahma, and the Mahabharata refers simply to the geological cataclysm which swept away nearly all the fourth race to make room for the fifth. Therefore is Vaivashvata Manu shown under 3 distinct attributes in our esoteric cosmogony: A, as the root Manu on globe A in the first round, B, as the seed of life on globe D in the fourth round, and C, as the seed of man at the beginning of every root race, in our fifth race especially. Note, one has to remember that in the Hindu philosophy, every differentiated unit is such only through the cycles of Maya, being one in its essence with the Supreme or One Spirit. Hence arises the seeming confusion and contradiction in the various Puranas, and at times in the same Purana about the same individual. Vishnu, as the maniformed Brahma, and as Brahma Neuter, is one, and yet he is said to be all the 28 Vyasas. See Vishnu Purana. In every Dvapara, third age, Vishnu, in the person of Vyasa, divides the Veda, which is one, into 4 and many portions. 28 times have the Vedas been arranged by the great rishis in the Vaivasvata Manvantara, in the Dvapara Yuga, and consequently 28 Vyasas have passed away, they who were all in the form of Veda Vyasas, who were the Vyasas of their respective eras. Book 3, Chapter 3. This world is Brahma in Brahma, from Brahma, nothing further to be known. Then again, there were in the first Manvantara 7 celebrated sons of Vashishta, who in the third Manvantara were sons of Brahma, that is, rishis, the illustrious progeny of Uriya. This is plain. The humanity of the first Manvantara is that of the 7th and of all the intermediate ones. The mankind of the first root race is the mankind of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, etc. To the last, it forms a cyclic and constant reincarnation of the monads belonging to the Ankurchans of our planetary chain. End of note. The very commencement of the latter witnesses, during the Dvapara Yuga, the destruction of the accursed sorcerers, of that island, Plato speaking only of its last island, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, in the Atlantic Ocean, from which there was an easy transition to other islands in the neighborhood of another large continent, America. Note on Dvapara Yuga. The Dvapara Yuga differs for each race. All races have their own cycles, which fact causes a great difference. For instance, the 4th sub-race of the Atlanteans was in its Kali Yuga when destroyed, whereas the 5th was in its Satya or Krita Yuga. The Aryan race is now in its Kali Yuga and will continue to be in it for 427,000 years longer, while various family races, called the Semitic, Hamitic, etc., are in their own special cycles. The forthcoming 6th sub-race, which may begin very soon, will be in its Satya Golden Age, while we reap the fruit of our iniquity in our Kali Yuga. End of note. It is this, quote, Atlantic, unquote, land, which was connected with a white island, and this white island was Ruta. But it was not the Atala and the White Devil of Colonel Wilford, see Asiatic Researches, Volume 8, page 280, as already shown. It may well be remarked here that the Dvapara Yuga lasts 864,000 years, according to the Sanskrit texts, and that if the Kali Yuga began only about 5,000 years ago, that is just 869,000 since the destruction took place. Again, these figures are not very widely different from those given by the geologists who place their glacial period 850,000 years ago. Then a woman was produced who came to Manu and declared herself his daughter, with whom he lived and begat the offspring of Manu. This refers to the psychological transformation of sexes during the 3rd root race, and the allegory is too transparently clear to need much explanation. Of course, as already remarked, in the separation of sexes, an androgyne being was supposed to divide his body into 2 halves, as in the case of Brahma and Vak, and even of Adam and Eve. And thus the female is, in a certain sense, his daughter, just as he will be her son, the flesh of his and her flesh, and the bone of his and her bone. Let it be also well remembered that not one of our Orientalists have yet learned to discern in those contradictions and amazing nonsense, as some call the Puranas, that reference to a yuga may mean around a root race and often a sub-race, as well as form a page torn out of pre-cosmic theogony. This double and triple meaning is proved by various references to one and the same individual, apparently under an identical name, while it refers in fact to events divided by entire kalpas. A good instance is that of Ila. She is first represented as one thing and then as another. In the exoteric legends, it is said that Manu Vaivasvata, desiring to create sons, instituted a sacrifice to Mitra and Varuna, but through a mistake of the officiating Brahman, a daughter only was obtained, Ila. Then, through the favor of the gods, her sex is changed, and she becomes a man, Sudyumna. Then she is again turned into a woman, and so on. The fable adding that Shiva and his consort were pleased that she would be male 1 month and female another. This has a direct reference to the third root race, whose men were androgynes. But some very learned Orientalists think, see Hindu Classical Dictionary, and have declared that Ila was primarily food, nourishment, or a libation of milk, thence a stream of praise personified as the goddess of speech. The profane are not told, however, the reason why a libation of milk or a stream of praise should be male and female by turn, unless indeed there is some internal evidence which the occultists fail to perceive. In their most mystical meanings, the union of Svayambhuva Manu with Vak Sata Rupa, his own daughter, this being the first, quote, humorization, unquote, of the dual principle, of which Vaivasvata Manu and Ila are a secondary and a third form, stands in cosmic symbolism as the root life, the germ from which spring all the solar systems, the worlds, angels, and the gods. For, as says Vishnu, from Manu all creation, gods, asuras, man must be produced. By him the world must be created, that which moves and moves not. But we may find worse opponents than even the Western scientists and Orientalists. If, on the question of figures, Brahmins may agree with our teaching, we are not so sure that some of them, orthodox conservatives, may not raise objections to the modes of procreation attributed to their Pita Devatas. We shall be called upon to produce the works from which we quote, while they will be invited by us to read their own Puranas a little more carefully and with an eye to the esoteric meaning. And then, we repeat again, they will find, under the veil of more or less transparent allegories, every statement made herein corroborated by their own works. 1 or 2 instances have already been given as regards the appearance of the second race, which is called the sweat-born. This allegory is regarded as a fairy tale, and yet it conceals a psychophysiological phenomenon and one of the greatest mysteries of nature. But in view of the chronological statements made herein, it is natural to ask, could men exist 18 million years ago? To this occultism answers in the affirmative, notwithstanding all scientific objectors. Moreover, this duration covers only the Vaivasvata Manu man, that is, the male and female entity already separated into distinct sexes. The 2.5 races that preceded that event may have lived 300 million years ago, for all that science can tell. For the geological and physical difficulties in the way of the theory could not exist for the primeval ethereal man of the occult teachings. The whole issue of the quarrel between the profane and the esoteric sciences depends upon the belief in and demonstration of the existence of an astral body within the physical, the former independent of the latter. Paul Dacier, the positivist, seems to have proven the fact pretty plainly, not to speak of the accumulated testimony of the ages and that of the modern spiritualists and mystics. It will be found difficult to reject this fact in our age of proofs, tests, and ocular demonstrations. Note on Paul Dacier, see Posthumous Humanity, translated by H. S. Olcott, London, 1887. End of note. The secret doctrine maintains that, notwithstanding the general cataclysms and disturbances of our globe, which, owing to its being the period of its greatest physical development, for the 4th round is the middle point of the life allotted to it, were far more terrible and intense than during any of the 3 preceding rounds, the cycles of its earlier psychic and spiritual life and of its semi-ethereal conditions. Physical humanity has existed upon it for the last 18 million years. Note: Professor Newcomb says, the heat evolved by contraction would last only 18 million years. See Popular Astronomy, page 500. But a temperature permitting the existence of water could not be reached earlier than 10 million years ago. See Windshell's World Life, page 356. But Sir W. Thomson says that the whole age of the incrustation of the earth is 18 million years, though this year he has again altered his opinion and allows only 15 million years as the age of the sun. As will be shown in the addenda, the divergence of scientific opinions is so great that no reliance can ever be placed upon scientific speculation. End of note. This period was preceded by 300 million years of the mineral and vegetable development. To this, all those who refuse to accept the theory of a boneless, purely ethereal man will object. Science, which knows only of physical organisms, will feel indignant, and materialistic theology still more so. The first will object on logical and reasonable grounds based on the preconception that all animate organisms have always existed on the same plane of materiality in all the ages, the last on a tissue of most absurd fiction. The ridiculous claim usually brought forward by theologians is based on the virtual assumption that mankind, read Christians, on this planet have the honor of being the only human beings in the whole cosmos who dwell on a globe, and that they are consequently the best of their kind. Note, the essay on the plurality of worlds, 1853, an anonymous work, yet known to have been the production of Dr. Whewell, is a good proof of this. No Christian ought to believe in either the plurality of worlds or the geological age of the globe, argues the author, because if it is asserted that this world is only one among the many of its kind, which are all the work of God, as it is itself, that all are the seat of life, all the realm and dwelling of intelligent creatures endowed with will, subject to law and capable of free will, then it would become extravagant to think that our world should have been the subject of God's favors and his special interference, of his communications and his personal visit. Can the earth presume to be considered the center of the moral and religious universe, he asks, if it has not the slightest distinction to rely upon in the physical universe? Is it not as absurd to uphold such an assertion of the plurality of inhabited worlds as it would be today to uphold the old hypothesis of Ptolemy, who placed Earth in the center of our system? The above is quoted from memory, yet almost textually. The author fails to see that he is bursting his own soap bubble with such a defense. End of note. The occultists who believe firmly in the teachings of the mother philosophy repel the objections of both theologians and scientists. They maintain on their side that during those periods when there must have been insufferable heat, even at the two poles, successive floods, upheaval of the valleys, and constant shifting of the great waters and seas, none of these circumstances could form an impediment to human life and organization, such as assigned by them to the early mankind. Neither the heterogeneity of ambient regions, full of deleterious gases, nor the perils of a crust hardly consolidated, could prevent the first and second races from making their appearance even during the Carboniferous or the Silurian age itself. Thus the monads destined to animate future races were ready for the new transformation. They had passed their phases of immaterialization of plant and animal life from the lowest to the highest, and were waiting for their human, more intelligent form. Yet what could the plastic modelers do but follow the laws of evolutionary nature? Could they, as claimed by the biblical dead letter, form Lord God-like, or as Pygmalion in the Greek allegory, Adam Galatea out of volcanic dust, and breathe a living soul into man? No, because the soul was already there, latent in its monad, and needed but a coating. Pygmalion, who fails to animate his statue, and Bach-Ezivu of the Nazarene Gnostics, who fails to construct a human soul in the creature, are, as conceptions, far more philosophical and scientific than Adam taken in the dead-letter sense, or the biblical Elohim creators. Esoteric philosophy, which teaches spontaneous generation after the Sishta and Prajapati have thrown the seed of life on earth, shows the lower angels able to construct physical man only, even with the help of nature, after having evolved the ethereal form out of themselves, and leaving the physical form to evolve gradually from its ethereal, or what would now be called protoplasmic, model. This will again be objected to. Spontaneous generation is an exploded theory, we shall be told. Pasteur's experiments disposed of it 20 years ago, and Professor Tyndall is against it. Well, suppose he is. He ought to know that, should spontaneous generation be indeed proven impossible in our present world period and actual conditions, which the occultists deny, still it would be no demonstration that it could not have taken place under different cosmic conditions, not only in the seas of the Laurentian period, but even on the then convulsed earth. It would be interesting to know how science could ever account for the appearance of species and life on earth, especially of man, once that she rejects both the biblical teachings and spontaneous generation. Pasteur's observations, however, are far from being perfect or proven. Blanchard and Dr. Luteau reject their importance and show that they have none. The question is so far left sub judice, as well as that other one, when at what period life appeared on the earth. As to the idea that Haeckel's moneron, a pinch of salt, has solved the problem of the original life, it is simply absurd. Those materialists who feel inclined to pooh-pooh the theory of the self-existent, the self-born heavenly man, represented as an ethereal astral man, must excuse even a tyro in occultism laughing, in his turn, at some speculations of modern thought. After proving most learnedly that the primitive speck of protoplasm, moneron, is neither animal nor plant, but both, and that it has no ancestors among either of these, since it is the moneron which serves as a point of departure for all organized existence, we are finally told that the monera are their own ancestors. This may be very scientific, but it is very metaphysical also, too much so even for the occultist. If spontaneous generation has changed its methods now, owing perhaps to accumulated material on hand, so as to almost escape detection, it was in full swing in the genesis of terrestrial life. Even the simple physical form and the evolution of species show how nature proceeds. The scale-bound gigantic sauria, the winged pterodactyl, the megalosaurus, and the 100-feet-long iguanodon of the later period are the transformations of the earliest representatives of the animal kingdom found in the sediments of the primary epoch. There was a time when all those above enumerated antediluvian monsters appeared as filamentoid infusoria without shell or crust, with neither nerves, muscles, organs, nor sex, and reproduced their kind by gemation, as do microscopical animals also, the architects and builders of our mountain ranges agreeably to the teachings of science. Why not man in this case? Why should he not have followed the same law in his growth, that is, gradual condensation? Every unprejudiced person would prefer to believe that primeval humanity had at first an ethereal, or if so preferred, a huge filamentoid jelly-like form, evolved by gods or natural forces which grew, condensed throughout millions of ages, and became gigantic in its physical impulse and tendency, until it settled into the huge physical form of the fourth race, man, rather than believe him created of the dust of the earth, literally, or from some unknown anthropoid ancestor. Nor does our esoteric theory clash with scientific data except on first appearance, as Dr. A. Wilson says in a letter to Knowledge, December 23, 1881. Evolution, rather nature in the light of evolution, has only been studied for some 25 years or so. That is, of course, a mere fractional space in the history of human thought." Unquote. And just because of that, we do not lose all hope that materialistic science will amend its ways and will gradually accept the esoteric teachings, if even at first divorced from their, to science too, metaphysical elements. Has the last word on the subject of human evolution yet been said? Quote, "Each answer to the great question, man's real place in nature, invariably asserted by the followers of its propounder, if not by himself, to be complete and final, remains in high authority and esteem. It may be for 1 century, it may be for 20, writes Professor Huxley. But as invariably, time proves each reply to have been a mere approximation to the truth, tolerable chiefly on account of the ignorance of those by whom it was accepted, and wholly intolerable when tested by the larger knowledge of their successors." Unquote. Will this eminent Darwinian admit the possibility of his pithecoid ancestry being assignable to the list of wholly intolerable beliefs in the larger knowledge of occultists? But whence the savage? Mere rising to the civilized state does not account for the evolution of form. In the same letter, The Evolution of Man, Dr. Wilson makes other strange confessions. Thus he observes in answer to the queries put to knowledge by G.M. Quote, has evolution affected any change in man? If so, what change? If not, why not? If we refuse to admit, as science does, that man was created a perfect being and then became degraded, there exists only another supposition, that of evolution. If man has arisen from a savage to a civilized state, that surely is evolution. We do not yet know, because such knowledge is difficult to acquire if the human frame is subject to the same influences as those of lower animals. But there is little doubt that elevation from savagery to civilized life means and implies evolution, and that of considerable extent. Mentally, man's evolution cannot be doubted. The ever-widening sphere of thought has sprung from small and rude beginnings, like language itself. But man's ways of life, his power of adaptation to his surroundings, and countless other circumstances have made the facts and cause of his evolution very difficult to trace. Unquote. This very difficulty ought to make the evolutionists more cautious in their affirmations. But why is evolution impossible if man was created a perfect being and then became degraded? At best it can only apply to the outward physical man. As remarked in Isis Unveiled, Darwin's evolution begins at the middle point instead of commencing from man, as for everything else, from the universals. The Aristotelian-Baconian method may have its advantages, but it has undeniably already demonstrated its defects. Pythagoras and Plato, who proceeded from the universals downward, are now shown more learned in the light of modern science than was Aristotle. For he posed and denounced the idea of the revolution of the earth, and even of its rotundity. Almost all those, he wrote, who affirm that they have studied heaven in its uniformity, claim that the earth is in the center, but the philosophers of the Italian school, otherwise called the Pythagoreans, teach entirely the contrary. Because A, the Pythagoreans were initiates, and B, they followed the deductive method, whereas Aristotle, the father of the inductive system, complained of those who taught that the center of our system was occupied by the sun, and the earth was only a star, which by a rotary motion around the same center produces night and day. Vita da Cielo, Book 2, Chapter 13. The same with regard to man. The theory taught in the secret doctrine and now expounded is the only one which can, without falling into the absurdity of a miraculous man created out of the dust of the earth, or the still greater fallacy of man evolving from a pinch of lime salt, the ex-protoplasmic moneron, account for his appearance on earth. Analogy is the guiding law in nature, the only true Ariadne's thread that can lead us through the inextricable paths of her domain toward her primal and final mysteries. Nature, as a creative potency, is infinite, and no generation of physical scientists can ever boast of having exhausted the list of her ways and methods, however uniform the laws upon which she proceeds. If we can conceive of a ball of fire mist becoming gradually, as it rolls through aeons of time in the interstellar spaces, a planet, a self-luminous globe, to settle into a man-bearing world or earth, thus having passed from a soft plastic body into a rock-bound globe. And if we see on it everything evolving from the non-nucleated jelly speck that becomes the sarcode of the moneron, then passes from its protistic state into the form of an animal to grow into a gigantic reptilian monster of the Mesozoic times, then dwindles again into the comparatively dwarfish crocodile, now confined solely to tropical regions, and the universally common lizard, how can man alone escape the general law? Note on the sarcode of the moneron, or what is more generally known as protoplasm. This substance received its name of sarcode from Professor Duryodhin Bumets far earlier. End of note. Note on the protistic state. The monera are indeed protista. They are neither animals nor plants, writes Haeckel. The whole body of the moneron represents nothing more than a single thoroughly homogeneous particle of albumin in a firmly adhesive condition. See Journal of Microscopical Science, January 1869, page 28. Note on the common lizard. Behold the iguanodon of the Mesozoic ages, the monster 100 feet long, now transformed into the small iguana lizard of South America. Popular traditions about giants in days of old, and their mention in every mythology, including the Bible, may someday be shown to be founded on fact. In nature, the logic of analogy alone ought to make us accept these traditions as scientific verities. End of note. Quote, "There were giants on earth in those days," says Genesis, repeating the statement of all the other Eastern scriptures. And the Titans are founded on anthropological and physiological fact. And as the hard-shelled crustacean was once upon a time a jelly speck, a thoroughly homogeneous particle of albumen in a firmly adhesive condition, so was the outward covering of primitive man, his early coat of skin, plus an immortal spiritual monad, and a psychic temporary form and body within that shell. The modern hard, muscular man, almost impervious to any climate, was perhaps some 25 million years ago just what the Herculean monoran is, strictly an organism without organs, an entirely homogeneous substance with a structureless albumen body within and a human form only outwardly. No man of science has the right, in this century, to find the figures of the Brahmins preposterous in the question of chronology, for their own calculations often exceed by far the claims made by esoteric science. This may easily be shown. Helmholtz calculated that the cooling of our Earth from a temperature of 2000 degrees to 200 degrees centigrade must have occupied a period of no less than 350 million years. Western science, including geology, seems generally to allow our globe an age of about 500 million years altogether. Sir W. Thomson, however, limits the appearance of the earliest vegetable life to 100 million years ago, a statement respectfully contradicted by the archaic records. Speculations, furthermore, vary daily in the domains of science. Meanwhile, some geologists are very much opposed to such limitation. Folger calculates that the time requisite for the deposit of the strata known to us must at least have amounted to 648 millions of years. Both time and space are infinite and eternal. The Earth, as a material existence, is indeed infinite. The changes only which it has undergone can be determined by finite periods of time, says Burmeister. We must therefore assume that the starry heaven is not merely in space, what no astronomer doubts, but also in time, without beginning or end, that it never was created and is imperishable. See Solbe. Note: Force and Matter by L. Büchner, edited by J. F. Collingwood, FRSL, page 61. End of note. Solbe repeats exactly what the occultists say, but the Aryan occultists, we may be told, knew nothing of these later speculations. Quote, "They were even ignorant of the globular form of our Earth," unquote, says Coleman. To this the Vishnu Purana contains a reply which has forced certain Orientalists to open their eyes very widely. It says, "The sun is stationed for all time in the middle of the day and over against midnight in all the Dvipas, continents, Maitreya, but the rising and the setting of the sun being perpetually opposite to each other, and in the same way all the cardinal points, and so the cross points, Maitreya. People speak of the rising of the sun where they see it, and when the sun disappears there, to them is his setting. Of the sun, which is always in one and the same place, there is neither setting nor rising, for what is called rising and setting are only the seeing and the not seeing the sun." Unquote from Vishnu Purana, Book 2, Chapter 8. To this, Fitz-Edward Hall remarks, "The heliocentrism taught in this passage is remarkable. It is contradicted, however, a little further on, contradicted purposely, because it was a secret temple teaching. Martin Haug remarked the same teaching in another passage. It is useless to calumniate the Aryans no longer." To return to the chronology of the geologists and anthropologists, we are afraid science has no reasonable grounds on which she could oppose the views of the occultists in this direction, except that of man, the highest organic being of creation. Not a trace was found in the primary strata. Only in the uppermost, the so-called alluvial layer, is all that can be urged so far. That man was not the last member in the mammalian family, but the first in this round, is something that science will be forced to acknowledge one day. A similar view also has already been mooted in France on very high authority, that man can be shown to have lived in the mid-tertiary period and in a geological age when there did not yet exist one single specimen of the now known species of mammals, is a statement that science cannot deny and which has now been proven by the quatrephage. Note, see Introduction à l'étude des races humaines. End of note. But even supposing his existence in the Eocene period is not yet demonstrated, what period of time has elapsed since the Cretaceous period? We are aware of the fact that only the boldest geologists dare to place man further back than the Miocene age. But how long, we ask, is the duration of those ages and periods since the Mesozoic time? On this, after a good deal of speculation and wrangling, science is silent, the greatest authorities upon the subject being compelled to answer to the question, "We do not know." This ought to show that the men of science are no greater authorities in this matter than are the profane. If, according to Professor Huxley, the time represented by the coal formation would be 6 millions of years, how many more millions would be required to cover the time from the Jurassic period, or the middle of the so-called reptilian age, when the third race appeared, up to the Miocene, when the bulk of the fourth race was submerged? Note on 6 millions of years. Modern Science and Modern Thought by S. Lang, page 32. End of note. Note on the fourth race was submerged. Esoteric Buddhism, page 70. End of note. Those specialists whose computations of the ages of the globe and man are the most liberal always had the Shia majority against them. But this proves very little, since the majority rarely, if ever, turns out to be right in the long run. Harvey stood alone for many years. The advocates for crossing the Atlantic with steamers were in danger of ending their days in a lunatic asylum. Mesmer is classed to this day in the encyclopedias, along with Cagliostro and Saint-Germain, as a charlatan and impostor. And now that Monsieur Charcot and Richer have vindicated Mesmer's claims, and that mesmerism, under its new name of hypnotism, a false nose on a very old face, is accepted by science, it does not strengthen one's respect for that majority when one sees the ease and unconcern with which its members treat of hypnotism, telepathic impact, and its other phenomena. They speak of it, in short, as if they had believed it since the days of Solomon, and had never called its votaries only a few years ago lunatics and impostors. Note: the same fate is in store for spiritualistic phenomena and all the other psychological manifestations of the inner man. Since the days of Hume, whose researches culminated in a nihilistic idealism, psychology has gradually shifted its position to one of crass materialism. Hume is regarded as a psychologist, and yet he denied a priori the possibility of phenomena in which millions now believe, including many men of science. The hylo-idealists of today are rank annihilationists. The schools of Spencer and Bain are respectively positivist and materialist, and not metaphysical at all. It is psychism and not psychology. It reminds one as little of the Vedantic teaching as the pessimism of Schopenhauer and von Hartmann recalls the esoteric philosophy, the heart and soul of the true Buddhism. End of note. The same revulsion of thought is in store for the long period of years claimed by esoteric philosophy as the age of sexual and physiological mankind. Therefore even the stanza, which says, "The mind-born, the boneless, gave being to the will-born with bones," adding that this took place in the middle of the third race 18 million years ago, has yet a chance of being accepted by future scientists. As far as 19th century thought is concerned, we shall be told even by some personal friends who are imbued with an abnormal respect for the shifting conclusions of science that such a statement is absurd. How much more improbable will appear our further assertion to the effect that the antiquity of the first race dates back millions of years beyond this again. For although the exact figures are withheld, and it is out of the question to refer the incipient evolution of the primeval divine races with certainty to either the early secondary or the primary ages of geology, one thing is clear, that the figures 18 million of years, which embrace the duration of sexual physical man, have to be enormously increased if the whole process of spiritual, astral, and physical development is taken into account. Many geologists indeed consider that the duration of the quaternary and tertiary ages demands the concession of such an estimate, and it is quite certain that no terrestrial conditions whatever negative the hypothesis of an Eocene man, if evidence for his reality is forthcoming. Occultists who maintain that the above date carries as far back into the secondary or reptilian age may refer to M. de Quatrefages in support of the possible existence of man in that remote antiquity. But with regard to the earliest root races, the case is very different. If the thick agglomeration of vapors charged with carbonic acid that escaped from the soil or was held in suspension in the atmosphere since the commencement of sedimentation offered a fatal obstacle to the life of human organisms as now known, how, it will be asked, could the primeval men have existed? This consideration is, in reality, out of court. Such terrestrial conditions as were then operative had no touch with the plane on which the evolution of the ethereal astral races proceeded. Only in relatively recent geological periods has the spiral course of cyclic law swept mankind into the lowest grade of physical evolution, the plane of gross material causation. In those early ages, astral evolution was alone in progress, and the two planes, the astral and the physical, though developing on parallel lines, had no direct point of contact with one another. Note: it must be noted that, though the astral and physical planes of matter ran parallel with one another even in the earliest geological ages, yet they were not in the same phases of manifestation in which they are now. The Earth did not reach its present grade of density till 18 million years ago. Since then both the physical and astral planes have become grosser. End of note. It is obvious that a shadow-like ethereal man is related by virtue of his organization, if such it can be called, only to that plane from which the substance of his upadhi is derived. There are things, perhaps, that may have escaped the far-seeing but not all-seeing eyes of our modern naturalists. Yet it is nature herself who undertakes to furnish the missing links. Agnostic speculative thinkers have to choose between the version given by the secret doctrine of the East and the hopelessly materialistic Darwinian and biblical accounts of the origin of man, between no soul and no spiritual evolution, and the occult doctrine which repudiates special creation and the evolutionist anthropogenesis equally. Again, to take up the question of spontaneous generation, life, as science shows, has not always reigned on this terrestrial plane. There was a time when even the Hercalian moneron, that simple globule or protoplasm, had not yet appeared at the bottom of the seas. Whence came the impulse which caused the molecules of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, etc. to group themselves into the urschleim of Åkern, that organic slime now christened protoplasm? What were the prototypes of the monera? They, at least, could not have fallen in meteorites from other globes already formed, Sir W. Thomson's wild theory to this effect notwithstanding. And if they have so fallen, if our Earth got its supply of life germs from other planets, who or what had carried them into those planets? Here again, unless the occult teaching is accepted, we are compelled once more to face a miracle, to accept the theory of personal, anthropomorphic creator, the attributes and definitions of whom, as formulated by the monotheists, clash as much with philosophy and logic as they degrade the ideal of an infinite universal deity before whose incomprehensible, awful grandeur the highest human intellect feels dwarfed. Let not the modern philosopher, while arbitrarily placing himself on the highest pinnacle of human intellectuality hitherto evolved, show himself spiritually and intuitionally so far below the conceptions of even the ancient Greeks, themselves on a far lower level in these respects than the philosophers of Eastern antiquity. Hylozoism, when philosophically understood, is the highest aspect of pantheism. It is the only possible escape from idiotic atheism based on lethal materiality and the still more idiotic anthropomorphic conceptions of the monotheists, between which two it stands on its own entirely neutral ground. Hylozoism demands absolute divine thought, which would pervade the numberless active creating forces or, quote, creators, unquote, which entities are moved by and have their being in, from, and through that divine thought, the latter nevertheless having no more personal concern in them or their creations than the sun has in the sunflower and its seeds, or in vegetation in general. Such active, quote, creators, unquote, are known to exist and are believed in because perceived and sensed by the inner man in the occultist. Thus the latter says that an absolute deity having to be unconditioned and unrelated cannot be thought of at the same time as an active, creating, one living God without immediate degradation of the ideal. Note: the conception and definition of the absolute by Cardinal Cusa may satisfy only the Western mind, prisoned so unconsciously to itself and entirely degenerated by long centuries of scholastic and theological sophistry. But this recent philosophy of the absolute, traced by Sir W. Hamilton to Cusa, would never satisfy the more acutely metaphysical mind of the Hindu Vedantin. End of note. A deity that manifests in space and time, these two being simply the forms of that which is the absolute all, can be but a fractional part of the whole. And since that all cannot be divided in its absoluteness, therefore that sensed creator, we say creators, can be at best but the mere aspect thereof. To use the same metaphor, inadequate to express the full idea, yet well adapted to the case in hand, these creators are like the numerous rays of the solar orb which remains unconscious of and unconcerned in the work, while its mediating agents, the rays, become the instrumental media every spring, the manvanteric dawn of the earth, in fructifying and awakening the dormant vitality inherent in nature and its differentiated matter. This was so well understood in antiquity that even the moderately religious Aristotle remarked that such work of direct creation would be quite unbecoming to God. Plato and other philosophers taught the same. Deity cannot set its own hand to creation. Aprepes to theo, or to an apanta. This Cudworth calls Hylozoism. As old Zeno is credited by Laertius with having said, nature is a habit moved from itself according to seminal principles, perfecting and containing those several things which in determinate times are produced from it, and acting agreeably to that from which it was secreted. Note: Cudworth's Intellectual System, 1, page 328, end of note. Let's return to our subject, pausing to think over it. Indeed, if there was vegetable life during those periods that could feed on the then deleterious elements, and if there was even animal life whose aquatic organization could be developed, notwithstanding the supposed scarcity of oxygen, why could there not be human life also in its incipient physical form, that is, in a race of beings adapted for that geological period and its surroundings? Besides, science confesses that it knows nothing of the real length of geological periods. But the chief question before us is whether it is quite certain that, from the time of that which is called the Azoic Age, there ever was such an atmosphere as that hypothesized by the naturalists. Not all the physicists agree with this idea. Were the writer anxious to corroborate the teachings of the secret doctrine by exact science, it would be easy to show, on the admission of more than one physicist, that the atmosphere has changed little, if at all, since the first condensation of the oceans, that is, since the Laurentian period, the Pyrolithic Age. Such, at any rate, is the opinion of Blanchard, S. Meunier, and even of Bischoff, as the experiments of the latter scientist with basalts have shown. For were we to take the word of the majority of scientists as to the quantity of deadly gases and of elements entirely saturated with carbon and nitrogen in which the vegetable and animal kingdoms are shown to have lived, thriven, and developed, then one would have to come to the curious conclusion that there were in those days oceans of liquid carbonic acid instead of water. With such an element, it becomes doubtful whether the ganoids or even the primitive trilobites themselves could live in the oceans of the primary age, let alone in those of the Silurian, as shown by Blanchard. The conditions that were necessary for the earliest race of mankind, however, require no elements, whether simple or compound. That which was stated at the beginning is maintained. The spiritual ethereal entity which lived in spaces unknown to Earth before the first sidereal jelly speck evolved in the ocean of crude cosmic matter, billions and trillions of years before our globular speck in infinity called Earth came into being and generated the moneron in its drops, called oceans, needed no, quote, elements, unquote. The mono with soft bones could well dispense with calcic phosphate, as he had no bones, save in the figurative sense. And while even the monera, however homogeneous their organism, still required physical conditions of life that would help them toward further evolution, the being which became primitive man, and the father of man, after evolving on planes of existence undreamt of by science, could well remain impervious to any state of atmospheric conditions around him. The primitive ancestor in Brasseur de Bourbourg Pourpoulvu, who, in the Mexican legends, could act and live with equal ease underground and water as upon the earth, answers only to the second and early third races in our texts. And if the three kingdoms of nature were so different in pre-diluvian ages, why should not man have been composed of materials and combinations of atoms now entirely unknown to physical science? The plants and animals now known in almost numberless varieties and species have all developed according to specific hypotheses from primitive and far fewer organic forms. Why should not the same have occurred in the case of man, the elements, and the rest? Universal Genesis starts from the one, breaks into 3, then 5, and finally culminates into 7, to return into 4, 3, and 1. From commentary. For additional proofs, consult Part 2 of this volume, The Septenary Nature. The next chapter is Stanza 7, from the semi-divine down to the first human races.